The Silent Miracle. Chapter 1. The Arrival. Ben Hawkins stood on the edge of the Coldwater Penitentiary yard, his hands resting on his belt as he watched the prison bus approach through the dense fog. The air was thick with humidity, even though it was supposed to be an autumn evening. The men under his command had been talking about this new arrival for days, speculating, whispering, passing rumors about the unknown as Elijah Cole. Ben had heard it all before. As head guard of Coldwater's death row, he'd seen plenty of criminals, killers, and monsters come and go. Some of them caused a stir, but in the end, they were all the same, guilty, broken men walking their last mile. Still, something about this transfer felt different, and the tension hanging in the air wasn't something Ben could easily dismiss. As the bus came to a stop, the doors opened with a hydraulic hiss, and the heavy chains of the prisoner rattled as he was escorted off. Elijah Cole was a giant of a man, towering at nearly 7 feet, his broad shoulders filling the doorway of the bus. His head was shaved, and his eyes, dark and deep, seemed to take in everything around him with unsettling calm. "Is that him?" One of the younger guards, Peterson, muttered from beside Ben, sounding almost awed. "Yeah, that's him," Ben replied, his voice steady. He wasn't about to let the rookie see that he, too, felt uneasy. "Let's get him processed." The guards moved quickly, but it was hard not to notice the sheer size of the man as they attached the additional cuffs and shackles to his wrists and ankles. Cole was quiet, compliant even, as they led him toward Block D, where Coldwater housed its most dangerous and condemned inmates. The facility's long concrete hallways echoed with the sound of heavy boots and rattling chains. As Ben followed, keeping a careful eye on the new inmate, his mind wandered to the crime that had brought Cole here. The brutal murder of 2 young sisters had shaken the entire county, their bodies found in the woods near their home, and all signs had pointed to Elijah Cole. He had been found near the scene, covered in blood, with no explanation other than that he had tried to help. Ben wasn't one to believe in coincidences, but there was something in Cole's eyes that unsettled him, something beyond guilt or fear. It was as though the men carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, and yet there was no visible anger or defiance. Instead, there was only sadness. When they reached Block D, Ben motioned for the guards to open the cell. Cole stepped inside without a word, sitting down on the narrow cot that would be his home for the remainder of his days. The guards secured the door with a loud clang, locking him in place, and for a moment, Ben lingered by the bars. "Elijah Cole," Ben said, his voice cutting through the silence. Cole lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting Ben's. There was no malice in them, but there was something else, something that sent a shiver down Ben's spine. "You know why you're here," Ben continued, his tone firm but measured. Cole nodded once, slowly. "I know," he said softly, his voice deep but surprisingly gentle. "You got anything to say about it?" For a long moment, Cole was silent. Then, with a heavy sigh, he replied, "Ain't nothing I say gonna change what's been done." Ben narrowed his eyes, studying the men. He had expected anger, defiance, maybe even fear, but all he saw was weariness. It was unsettling. "Get some rest," Ben said after a pause, stepping back from the cell. "It's gonna be a long night." As he turned to leave, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that Elijah Cole was more than just another condemned man. There was something deeper here, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. But whatever it was, he had a feeling it wouldn't stay hidden for long. Curious about what's behind Elijah Cole's calm demeanor? Stay tuned for the mysteries unfolding and subscribe to catch every chapter. Chapter 2. The First Signs. Coldwater Penitentiary had a rhythm, a steady, predictable routine that Ben Hawkins had come to rely on over the years. But ever since Elijah Cole's arrival, that rhythm felt disrupted. The guards were jumpier, the air felt heavier, and even the other inmates seemed on edge. Cole himself remained quiet, sitting in his cell day after day, staring at the floor as if lost in thought. He didn't cause trouble, didn't speak unless spoken to, but there was something about his presence that was impossible to ignore. It started with the guards. Jack Carter, one of the more senior officers, had been suffering from migraines for weeks. Everyone knew about it. He complained loudly enough that no one could miss it. He had tried everything, from painkillers to dark rooms, but nothing seemed to help. Then, one night, after finishing his shift watching over Cole's block, Jack came into the guard room looking like a new man. "Ben, you're not gonna believe this," Jack said, his voice filled with disbelief as he rubbed the back of his neck. "What?" Ben replied, barely looking up from the paperwork he was filling out. "My headaches. They're gone." Ben glanced up, frowning. "Gone." Just like that, Jack said, snapping his fingers. "I went by Cole's cell last night, right before my shift ended. He was just sitting there, staring at me. Didn't say a word, but I don't know, man. I felt this warmth. And when I woke up this morning, the headaches were gone. Haven't felt this good in months." Ben leaned back in his chair, studying Jack's face. The older guard didn't look like he was joking, but what he was saying didn't make any sense. "You think Cole had something to do with it?" Ben asked, his tone skeptical. "I don't know," Jack admitted. "But it was weird, man. Real weird." Ben didn't respond right away, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. He had seen strange things in his years working on death row, but this was something else. Could it really be possible that Elijah Cole had some kind of power? Over the next few days, other guards began to report similar stories. A cough that had plagued one officer for months disappeared overnight after a shift near Cole's cell. Another guard with a bad back claimed he felt lighter after standing watch near the prisoner. At first, Ben dismissed it all as coincidence. But the more it happened, the harder it became to ignore. The real turning point came one night when an inmate, known for his violent outbursts, had a breakdown. Guards rushed to restrain him, expecting a fight, but found him sitting quietly on the floor outside Cole's cell. The man was crying, sobbing, really, and muttering something about being saved. Ben arrived moments later, pushing through the crowd of guards to get a closer look. The inmate, a hardened criminal named Eddie Dawson, was weeping uncontrollably, his hands covering his face as he rocked back and forth. "What the hell's going on here?" Ben demanded, his voice sharp as he knelt beside Dawson. He did it," Dawson whispered, his voice trembling. "Cole, he took it away. The anger, the hate. I felt it. I swear to God, I felt it leave me." Ben's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to look at Cole's cell. The giant man was sitting on his cot, his hands folded in his lap, watching the scene unfold with that same quiet calm. His eyes met Ben's, and for a moment, Ben felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't normal. None of it was. And as much as Ben wanted to dismiss it all as coincidence, he knew deep down that something far more unsettling was happening here. What is Elijah Cole really capable of? The truth might be more than you can handle. Subscribe and share to follow this gripping mystery. Chapter 3. The Touch. The tension in Coldwater Penitentiary had shifted from quiet unease to something far more unnerving. It wasn't just the guards who were whispering about Elijah Cole now, it was the prisoners, too. Word had spread that Cole wasn't just a quiet giant awaiting his execution. He was something more. Something beyond explanation. Ben Hawkins didn't want to believe it. He was a practical man, a man of rules and order. He had served as head guard for over a decade, and in all that time, he'd never encountered anything he couldn't make sense of. But Elijah Cole was different, and no matter how hard Ben tried to ignore it, the strange occurrences surrounding the man were becoming impossible to deny. It had started small. The guard with the migraines, the inmate who claimed his anger had been taken away, but soon, the incidents began piling up. An officer with arthritis found his hands inexplicably pain-free after walking past Cole's cell. Another prisoner, who had suffered from chronic insomnia, reported sleeping soundly for the first time in years after spending a night in the same block as Cole. But the breaking point came one afternoon when an inmate named Raymond, an older man serving time for a long list of violent crimes, collapsed outside Cole's cell. The guards had rushed to him, thinking it was just another routine medical emergency. But when they arrived, Raymond was already sitting up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I'm fine," he kept repeating, his voice shaky. "I don't know how, but I'm fine." Ben had been called down to Block D as soon as it happened. By the time he arrived, a small crowd of guards and inmates had gathered around Raymond, watching as he tried to explain what had happened. "He touched me," Raymond said, looking up at Ben with a mix of awe and fear. "I felt like I was dying, man. I've had this pain in my chest for years, and I thought this was it. I thought I was having a heart attack. But then Cole, he touched me, and it just went away." Ben's stomach turned as he glanced toward Cole's cell. The man was sitting on the edge of his cot, his hands folded in his lap, watching the scene unfold with that same calm expression he always wore. His eyes met Ben's for a moment, and Ben could swear there was a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or sorrow. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "He's lying," one of the guards muttered, breaking the uneasy silence. "It's all in his head." But Raymond shook his head violently. "No, it's not. I swear, I felt it. The pain, it was real. And now it's gone." Ben crouched down beside the man, his voice low and steady. "Raymond, are you telling me that Cole healed you? Is that what you're saying?" Raymond swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously toward the guards who were watching him with suspicion. "I don't know, man. I don't know what it was, but I'm telling you, I haven't felt this good in years. Something happened. Something real." Ben stood up slowly, his mind racing. This couldn't be real. There had to be an explanation, some rational reason for what was happening. But no matter how hard he tried to dismiss it, the evidence was mounting, and it all pointed to one man, Elijah Cole. That evening, after the commotion had settled, Ben found himself standing outside Cole's cell once again. The rest of the prison had quieted down, the usual sounds of clanging metal and murmured voices fading into the background. Ben stared at Cole through the bars, trying to make sense of the man before him. "You want to tell me what's going on here?" Ben asked, his voice low but firm. Cole didn't answer right away. He remained seated, his gaze distant, as if he were contemplating something far beyond the walls of the prison. Finally, after a long pause, he looked up at Ben. "I don't know what you want me to say, sir," Cole said quietly, his voice calm but heavy with emotion. "I didn't ask for this." "For what?" Ben pressed, stepping closer to the bars. "For people to start saying you're healing them? That you're curing them?" Cole sighed, rubbing a hand over his shaved head. "It just happens. I don't control it. People hurt, and when I'm near, I feel it. And sometimes, I can take it away." Ben stared at him, his mind struggling to process what Cole was saying. It didn't make any sense. This kind of thing wasn't possible. And yet, here was a man sitting in front of him, claiming that he could take away pain, cure sickness, just by being near someone. "You're telling me you can heal people," Ben said slowly, his tone flat. "I'm telling you I don't know how it works," Cole replied, his voice soft but steady. "But it happens. And it scares me, too." Ben felt a shiver run down his spine. There was no trace of arrogance or pride in Cole's voice, just a quiet resignation, like a man who had come to terms with a burden too heavy to bear. Ben wanted to dismiss it, to laugh it off as some kind of elaborate hoax, but the look in Cole's eyes told him it was no joke. "If what you're saying is true," Ben said, his voice barely above a whisper, "then why are you here? Why did they convict you of murdering those girls?" Cole's expression darkened, and for the first time, Ben saw a flicker of pain in the man's eyes. "I didn't kill them," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I tried to save them. I swear to God, I tried. But by the time I got there, it was too late. Ben's heart pounded in his chest as he watched Cole's face, searching for any sign of deception. But all he saw was sorrow, deep, unshakable sorrow. "I don't expect you to believe me," Cole continued, his voice barely audible now. "Nobody else did. But I swear, I didn't hurt those girls." Ben stood there in silence, the weight of Cole's words pressing down on him. He wanted to believe the man was lying, that this was all some kind of sick game. But the truth was, Ben didn't know what to believe anymore. What is Elijah Cole hiding, and could he really be innocent? The truth is darker than anyone imagined. Subscribe to discover the shocking twist in the next chapter. Chapter 4. The Confession. The hours after his conversation with Elijah Cole weighed heavily on Ben Hawkins. The man's words echoed in his mind, refusing to leave him in peace. "I didn't hurt those girls. I tried to save them. It was impossible. There was no way Cole could be innocent, not after everything that had been presented at the trial." But the sincerity in his voice, the anguish in his eyes, Ben couldn't ignore it. For the next few days, Ben found himself avoiding Cole's cell, choosing instead to focus on the routine of the prison, but it didn't help. The strange occurrences continued, and each one only deepened the mystery surrounding the men in Block D. Guards who had once dismissed the stories now spoke in hushed tones, their skepticism replaced with quiet curiosity or outright fear. It wasn't just the guards, either. The inmates, hardened criminals who had seen everything life could throw at them, were now whispering about Elijah Cole. The way they spoke, it was as if they believed Cole had some kind of power. A gift. A curse. Whatever it was, it had begun to affect the entire atmosphere of Coldwater Penitentiary. Ben had seen strange things in his time, but this was different. There was something unexplainable happening, and as much as Ben wanted to dismiss it, he couldn't. One evening, after most of the prison had settled into its nighttime quiet, Ben found himself walking the long, echoing halls toward Cole's cell. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, maybe more of the same cryptic responses, or maybe, just maybe, a confession. He wanted answers, and tonight, he was determined to get them. When Ben arrived at Block D, he found Elijah Cole sitting as he always did, calm and still, his massive frame hunched over on the small cot. The man barely looked up as Ben approached, but when he did, there was a heaviness in his eyes that made Ben's breath catch in his throat. "You've been avoiding me," Cole said quietly, his voice so soft that it almost blended with the distant sounds of the prison. Ben leaned against the bars, crossing his arms over his chest. "I've been thinking," he replied. "Thinking about what you said." Cole nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this. "And what did you decide?" Ben let out a long breath, trying to steady himself. "I'm still trying to figure out what's going on with you. These things, these miracles people keep talking about. It doesn't make sense." "No," Cole agreed, "it doesn't." There was a long silence between them, one that stretched out until the only sound was the distant clank of metal doors and the occasional shuffle of boots on concrete. Ben studied Cole, searching for any sign of deceit, but there was none. Just the same weary resignation that had been there since the first day he arrived. "You said you didn't kill those girls," Ben said, his voice quieter now, almost cautious. "You said you tried to save them." Cole's face tightened, his eyes darkening with pain. "That's the truth," he murmured. "I was too late. I found them. But by the time I got there, they were already gone." Ben's chest tightened. He wanted to believe that Cole was lying, that he was just another killer making excuses, but the raw emotion in his voice made it impossible to dismiss. "Why didn't you tell anyone this before?" Ben asked, his tone sharper than he intended. "Why didn't you speak up at the trial?" Cole let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Do you really think anyone would have believed me? A man like me, found covered in blood, standing over their bodies? No one wants to hear the truth when the lie fits so well." Ben's gut twisted. It was true, Elijah Cole had been an easy target. A large, intimidating man with a violent past, found at the scene of a brutal crime. The jury hadn't needed much convincing, and neither had the press. The entire town had condemned him before the trial even began. I tried to help them, Cole continued, his voice breaking slightly. I could feel it, their pain. I tried to take it away, but I couldn't. It was too much. Ben felt a cold chill run down his spine. The way Cole spoke, it was as if he believed he could have saved them. As if he truly believed he had some kind of power. "You're saying you can heal people," Ben said slowly, his voice filled with doubt. "That's what all of this is about?" Cole looked up, meeting Ben's gaze head-on. "I don't know how to explain it," he admitted. "But when people are hurting, I feel it. I can't stop it. It's like their pain becomes mine. And sometimes, if I'm close enough, I can take it away." Ben's heart pounded in his chest as he processed the words. It was insane, completely insane. And yet, everything that had happened in the prison since Cole's arrival pointed to one undeniable fact. Something strange was happening, and Cole was at the center of it. "But the girls," Ben pressed, his voice wavering. "Why didn't you heal them?" Cole's face crumpled with grief, and he lowered his head, his massive hands covering his face. "I tried," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I swear to God, I tried. But whatever had happened to them, it was too late. I couldn't save them." Ben stood there, frozen, as the weight of Cole's words settled over him. Could it be true? Could Elijah Cole, a man convicted of one of the most horrific crimes imaginable, actually be innocent? For the first time since the trial, Ben felt doubt. Real, painful doubt. And with that doubt came a terrifying realization. If Elijah Cole was telling the truth, then the real killer was still out there. Could Elijah Cole really be innocent? The truth may be more terrifying than the lie. Subscribe and share to follow the next shocking revelation. Chapter 5. The Weight of the Truth. The next few days were a blur for Ben Hawkins. He couldn't shake the conversation with Elijah Cole, couldn't stop replaying the man's words over and over in his mind. "I tried to save them." Those words haunted Ben, gnawing at the edges of his conscience. If Cole was innocent, and there was a growing part of Ben that believed he was, then something was terribly, horribly wrong. Ben spent hours combing through old case files, reviewing every detail of the trial, every piece of evidence, every testimony. The more he read, the more holes he found. It was as if everyone had been so eager to pin the crime on Cole that they had ignored anything that didn't fit their narrative. The evidence had been circumstantial at best. Cole had been found near the scene of the crime, yes, and he had been covered in the girl's blood, but there had been no direct proof that he was the one who killed them. And the witnesses, neighbors who had heard screams in the night, hadn't seen anything. They had only assumed it was Cole because, well, who else could it have been? The deeper Ben dug, the more uneasy he became. He had never questioned the system before, never doubted the fairness of a trial. But now, with the possibility of an innocent man being sent to his death, everything felt fragile, shaky, like the ground could fall out from beneath him at any moment. The final straw came when Ben tracked down an old report that had been buried deep in the case file. It was from a forensic expert who had examined the crime scene, and it contained a single, crucial detail that had been ignored: the time of death. According to the report, the girls had been dead for hours before Cole was even seen near the woods. Ben's blood ran cold as he read the report again and again, his heart pounding in his chest. The timeline didn't fit. It couldn't have been Cole. It was late that night when Ben made his way back to Block D, his mind racing with the weight of what he had uncovered. The prison was quiet, the guards on night shift standing by idly, their eyes heavy with exhaustion. Ben's boots echoed through the long, empty hallway as he approached Cole's cell. When he reached the bars, he found Cole sitting in his usual position, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes closed as if he were meditating. He looked peaceful, almost serene, like a man who had already accepted his fate. "Cole," Ben called softly, gripping the bars. Elijah opened his eyes slowly, turning his gaze toward Ben. There was no surprise in his expression, only a quiet acceptance, as if he knew this moment was coming. "I need to talk to you," Ben said, his voice lower than usual. "About the case. About those girls." Cole's expression darkened, and he shook his head slowly. "Ain't nothing I can tell you that'll change what's been done." "That's not true," Ben replied, stepping closer to the bars. "I've been looking into it. The time of death, the evidence, none of it points to you. You couldn't have done it." For a moment, Cole didn't speak. He just stared at Ben, his dark eyes filled with something that looked like sadness. "And who's gonna believe you?" he asked quietly. "You really think anyone cares what the truth is anymore? They've already made up their minds." Ben swallowed hard, the weight of Cole's words settling on him like a heavy stone. He knew Cole was right. The town had already decided that Elijah Cole was guilty, and nothing Ben said or did would change that. But that didn't mean he could just walk away from this. "Not now. I don't care what they think," Ben said firmly. "I need to know the truth. What happened that night?" Cole's eyes flickered with pain, and for a long time, he didn't respond. Ben could see the conflict on his face, the way the memories weighed on him. But finally, with a deep sigh, Cole spoke. "I found them," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I was walking through the woods that night, trying to clear my head. I heard the screams, but by the time I got there, it was too late. They were lying there, lifeless. And I could feel it, their pain, their fear. It hit me like a wave." Ben's heart raced as he listened, hanging on every word. "And then what?" Cole looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. I tried to take it away. The pain. I thought maybe, if I could just take it, maybe they'd wake up. Maybe they'd come back. But it didn't work." Ben felt a lump rise in his throat. He had never seen a man so full of sorrow, so weighed down by guilt for something he hadn't even done. "That's why you were covered in blood," Ben said softly, piecing it together. "You were trying to help them." Cole nodded, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "But it didn't matter. When the police found me, I was already guilty in their eyes. They didn't care why I was there, or what I was trying to do. All they saw was a monster." Ben's hands tightened on the bars, anger bubbling up inside him. It wasn't right. None of it was right. Elijah Cole wasn't a monster. He was a man who had tried, and failed, to do something good. And now, he was paying the price for someone else's crime. "There's still time," Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. "We can fight this. We can." Cole cut him off with a shake of his head. "It's too late for me, Hawkins. This place, it's already decided my fate. And maybe I deserve it. Maybe I was meant to carry this burden." Ben's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to argue, to fight, to scream at the injustice of it all, but deep down, he knew Cole was right. The system didn't care about the truth, it cared about closure, about punishment. And for Elijah Cole, that punishment had already been written in stone. But as Ben turned to leave, something strange happened. He felt it, a warmth, a heaviness lifting off his shoulders, like a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying was suddenly gone. He stopped, turning back to Cole. "What did you do?" Ben asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cole smiled sadly, his eyes softening. "I took it away. Just a little. Your pain. Your doubt." Ben stared at him, unable to speak. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to believe. Is there any hope left for Elijah Cole? The truth may be beyond anyone's reach. Subscribe and share to see where this mystery leads next. Chapter 6. The Last Plea. The following days at Coldwater Penitentiary felt like a surreal blur for Ben Hawkins. The routine of the prison continued as usual: meals, roll calls, lights out. But there was a tension that crackled in the air, a silent understanding that something profound was about to happen. The guards whispered in hushed tones about Elijah Cole, not with the contempt they once held for him, but with a mix of fear and reverence. The inmates had stopped their taunts, their sneers. Cole had become something more than just another man on death row. He had become a mystery no one could explain. Ben couldn't stop thinking about the night Cole had taken away his doubt. The feeling had been so real, so tangible. For the first time in his life, Ben had felt the weight of his worries lift. But it hadn't been just emotional relief, there was something more to it. Something otherworldly. And now, no matter how much he tried, Ben couldn't deny it any longer. Elijah Cole was different. He had a gift. A curse. Whatever it was real. But time was running out. Cole's execution was scheduled for the end of the week, and Ben knew that if he didn't act soon, an innocent man would die. More than that, something far greater would be lost. A man with the power to heal, to change lives, would be silenced forever. Ben had never questioned the system before, never doubted its fairness. But now, with Cole's fate hanging in the balance, the weight of that doubt was crushing him. Late one night, unable to sleep, Ben found himself back at Block D, standing outside Elijah Cole's cell. The halls were silent, save for the occasional shuffle of a guard making his rounds. Ben gripped the bars, his knuckles white with tension. He had come here to say something, but now, as he stood in front of Cole, the words wouldn't come. Cole looked up from his cot, his dark eyes calm as ever, but there was a heaviness in his expression, a kind of resigned sorrow that made Ben's chest tighten. "You can't let this happen," Ben said, his voice raw with emotion. "You don't deserve this. You're innocent." Cole smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It doesn't matter what I deserve, Ben. This place, this world, it's already decided my fate." Ben shook his head, stepping closer to the bars. "No. It's not too late. We can fight this. I've been looking into your case. There's evidence that proves you didn't kill those girls." Cole's smile faded, replaced by a deep sadness. "And who's gonna listen? The town needs someone to blame. They need to believe that justice was served. No one's gonna want to hear that they were wrong." Ben's heart raced. He knew Cole was right. He had seen it before, people clinging to the easy version of the truth, unwilling to admit that the system might have failed. But he couldn't just walk away, not after everything he had learned. "I'm not giving up on you," Ben said firmly. "We still have time. I can talk to the warden. We can get a stay of execution, reopen the case. There has to be something we can do." Cole looked at Ben with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, Ben. I really do. But even if they reopened the case, I don't think it would change anything. Some people are meant to carry burdens, and maybe this is mine." Ben's stomach twisted in frustration. How could Cole just accept this? How could he give up when the truth was so close to being revealed? "I don't believe that," Ben said, his voice rising with emotion. "I can't believe that." For the first time, Cole's calm demeanor cracked. His eyes filled with pain, and he leaned forward slightly, gripping the edge of his cot. "Do you think I want this?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Do you think I want to die for something I didn't do?" Ben's throat tightened as he watched the tears glisten in Cole's eyes. "Then fight," Ben urged, his voice trembling. "Fight for your life. Don't let them take it from you." Cole shook his head, his expression torn between hope and despair. "I'm tired, Ben," he said softly. "I've been carrying this gift for so long. I never asked for it. And every time I take someone's pain, every time I try to help, a piece of me dies inside. Maybe it's time for it to end." Ben felt a wave of anger surge through him. He slammed his fist against the bars, the sound echoing through the empty hall. "This isn't right," he said through gritted teeth. You don't get to just give up. Cole looked at Ben, his gaze steady but filled with sorrow. I'm not giving up, he said softly. I'm just accepting what I can't change. The words hit Ben like a punch to the gut. He had never felt so powerless, so utterly incapable of stopping what was coming. The truth was staring him in the face, but no one else could see it, and Cole had already made his peace with it. As the silence stretched between them, Ben realized that he was out of time. The system had already closed its fist around Elijah Cole, and no matter how hard he tried, Ben couldn't pry it open. But as Ben turned to leave, a thought struck him, something that had been gnawing at the back of his mind since the moment he met Cole. He turned back to the prisoner, his heart racing. Cole, Ben said quietly, there's something I need to know. Something you haven't told me. Cole's eyes flickered with uncertainty. What is it? Ben hesitated, then asked the question that had been haunting him. How did you get this ability? This power? Cole's expression darkened, and for a long moment, he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and filled with a deep, unshakable sadness. I don't know, he admitted. I've had it as long as I can remember. It's like a part of me, but it's not something I control. It just happens. Ben's mind raced. There had to be more to it. This kind of power, this ability to take away pain, didn't just happen. There had to be a reason, an explanation. But as he looked into Cole's weary eyes, he realized that maybe there wasn't one. Maybe this was simply one of those mysteries that would never be solved. I wish I could help you, Ben whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I really do. Cole smiled sadly, his eyes softening. You've already helped more than you know, Ben. You've given me peace. And that's more than I could have asked for. Ben stood there, his heart aching, knowing that this was the last time he would see Elijah Cole alive. There was nothing more he could do. The system had failed him. The world had failed him. And now, it was too late to save him. Can Elijah Cole truly find peace, or will the truth come too late? Don't miss the final chapter. Subscribe and share to see how this story ends. Chapter 7. The Final Mile. The morning of Elijah Cole's execution arrived like a thick fog over Coldwater Penitentiary. The usual sounds of the prison, clanging metal doors, shuffling feet, murmured conversations, felt muted, as if the very air had grown heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. Ben Hawkins stood by the window in his small office, staring out at the gray sky. He had hardly slept the night before, his mind racing with the impossible truth of Elijah Cole's innocence and the haunting certainty that nothing could be done to stop what was coming. It wasn't right. It wasn't just. But it was happening. The warden had made the rounds earlier that morning, overseeing the preparations for the execution. The guards were on edge, but none of them said it aloud. They had all heard the rumors about Cole's ability, about the strange healings that had happened in Block D. And yet, the process moved forward, unstoppable, like the slow march of time. Ben had fought for a stay of execution, pleading with the warden to review the evidence, to reconsider the case. But the system had moved too quickly, too decisively. The wheels of justice had already turned, and once they were in motion, there was no stopping them. Coldwater needed closure, and Elijah Cole was the one chosen to provide it. A heavy knock on the door snapped Ben out of his thoughts. It was Peterson, the young guard, looking pale and anxious. It's time, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Ben nodded, his stomach twisting into knots. He grabbed his jacket and followed Peterson down the long, dimly lit corridors of the prison, his footsteps echoing off the cold concrete walls. As they neared Block D, the other guards fell in line, their faces grim. Ben could feel the tension radiating off them. They were about to walk a man to his death, and every one of them knew deep down that something was wrong. But no one said a word. When they arrived at Elijah Cole's cell, Ben's breath caught in his throat. Cole was standing at the bars, his massive hands gripping the metal, his expression calm and composed. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger, no resistance. He had accepted his fate. The cell door creaked open, and the guards stepped forward to shackle Cole's wrists and ankles. Ben watched as they placed the chains on him, the sound of metal scraping against metal grating in his ears. It felt wrong. All of it felt wrong. As they led Cole out of the cell and down the narrow hallway, Ben walked beside him, unable to stop the flood of emotions rising inside him. The other guards stayed a few steps behind, their faces set in stone. No one wanted to speak. This wasn't just another execution. This was different. The walk to the execution chamber was short, but it felt like an eternity. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the walls. Ben's heart pounded in his chest as they turned the final corner, the heavy door of the chamber looming ahead like the gateway to something far darker than death. Before they entered, Ben stopped, placing a hand on Cole's arm. The guards glanced at him but said nothing. Cole turned his head slightly, his dark eyes meeting Ben's with quiet understanding. "I'm sorry," Ben whispered, his voice breaking. I tried to stop this." Cole gave him a small, sad smile. "I know you did," he said softly. "It's not your fault, Ben. Some things, they just have to be." Ben felt tears well up in his eyes, but he blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. "This isn't right," he muttered, more to himself than to Cole. "It's not right." Cole's gaze softened, and he nodded slowly. "Maybe not," he said, "but sometimes, right doesn't matter in this world." With that, they stepped into the chamber. The room was cold, sterile. The witnesses were already seated behind the glass partition, their faces hard and expressionless. Ben recognized some of them, members of the victims' families, reporters, state officials. They were here to see justice done. But Ben couldn't shake the feeling that they were all blind to the real truth. Cole was guided to the electric chair and strapped in, his massive frame barely fitting into the restraints. The guards worked in silence, securing the straps around his arms, legs, and chest. Ben stood back, watching, his heart aching with helplessness. When the warden entered, the room fell silent. He glanced at Cole, then at the clock on the wall. The time had come. "Do you have any final words?" the warden asked, his voice cold and formal. For a moment, Cole said nothing. He simply sat there, his eyes closed, his breathing steady. Then, slowly, he opened his eyes and looked directly at Ben, his gaze full of sorrow and something else, something deeper. "I forgive you," Cole said softly, his voice carrying through the room like a prayer. "All of you. I forgive you." Ben's heart shattered. He could feel the weight of those words pressing down on him, suffocating him. How could this man, this innocent man, find it in himself to forgive the people who had condemned him? How could he offer grace when the world had shown him nothing but cruelty? The warden gave the signal. The hum of the electricity filled the room, low at first, then growing louder. Ben's breath caught in his throat as the switch was thrown. The lights flickered, and the sound of power surging through the wires filled his ears. Elijah Cole's body tensed, his muscles straining against the restraints as the current ripped through him. But his face remained calm, peaceful, even. There was no pain, no struggle. Only a quiet resignation, as if he had already left this world behind. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The room fell silent. Cole's body slumped in the chair, the life drained from him. Ben stood frozen, his mind numb. It was over. The truth had died with Elijah Cole, and no one but him would ever know. As the witnesses began to file out, Ben remained in the room, staring at the lifeless body in the chair. He couldn't move, couldn't think. All he could feel was the overwhelming sense of loss, the knowledge that something sacred had been destroyed. And then, as if in a dream, Ben felt it again, that warmth, that lightness. The same sensation he had felt the night Cole had taken away his doubt. It washed over him now, filling him with a strange, inexplicable peace. He looked at Cole's body, tears blurring his vision, and he realized what had happened. Even in death, Elijah Cole had given him one final gift. The end. If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.